Hey, good morning. It is time for Coffee Talk Sunday morning. What time is it? It is 6:02. Long weekend in America, the Memorial Day weekend. I got my coffee. It's a nice Colombian roast this morning. I need my, what is that thing? Coaster. I need my coaster so I don't mess up my desk. I'm looking forward to this week as far as the Coffee Talk goes, and I have for a couple days. We got lots of good controversy brewing in World of Tanks. We'll talk about some of that. Try to take a more level-headed look at some of the things going on. But Wargaming's at it again. Let's put it that way. Good thing about these Sunday Coffee Talks is I always have something to talk about generated by buffoonery. It's like low-hanging fruit every week. We'll go over the missions and specials as we always do. The K91 Object 277 are announced. I can give you the XP requirements for those two. They're going to change Ruinberg, and that's a good discussion for their map. I won't use that word. Changes. How about that? The 268 V4, a little discussion on that. I know I've talked about it for 2 weeks in a row, but I think I have the basic gist of what's going to happen, and we'll discuss how that's going to go down, or how I think that's going to go down. We'll jump over to Province, another map situation. Anyone love Province? Raise your hand if you love Province. I didn't think you did. Unless you're a camper, you're going to love Province, or do love Province. And then we're going to get to the good controversial part. We got two things there. The first one is the preferential rebalance, which I'm sure most of you are aware of. That one's pretty funny. And ongoing. We have an ongoing situation, folks. And buried in all that is a Slava interview with more throwing under the bus, misdirection, and other such ridiculous comments. We'll get to that as well. So lots of news in the world of tanks. World, grab your coffee. Like I said, nice Colombian. I got my Disney mug. See, I'm dad, right? Okay, there we go. Let's get started. Kicking it off with the specials you can find. What do we have? We got a T-44-100. I won mine for free, or ground for it during a marathon. But you can buy it, the standard packages. It's actually pretty good. Premium tier 8 medium tank. Believe it or not. A Thunderbolt is back, so you can buy that in the various packages and by itself. We talked about the 122 and the Cromwell. Pieces of the Berlin 5 at this point. There's that Warhammer tank we talked about last week. That's still around. The Chrysler K is back out in case you want a tier 8 premium with no frontal weak spots. And I'm sure you do. The Iraq, or Centurion works, it's a Centurion, but it's actually the Iraq. Centurion 5.1, that's still out, and then lots of different kit or bundles and whatnot going on here. So that's in the special side, but let's go over the vehicle side because this is germane to a discussion later on. So let's say I'm looking at all my vehicles and these are the specials, but I want to get one of the basic tanks that's out all the time. And I cruise on down here and I start seeing these tanks and I go, all right, well, so what's the special deal with these tanks? Oh, I want an IS-6. How about we get an IS-6? We're gonna purchase an IS-6 today, Phil. Let's go. We'll check it out. We'll go to the purchase. Oh, wait a minute. Guido got burned on this before, I remember. So we're gonna actually go back. We'll click out of this. We're just gonna click here instead of on purchase because purchase doesn't tell us all the details, right? You want the details. Let's get the details. So we're gonna click on this. Oh, there we go. Whew. Now we're gonna find out everything we need to know about the IS-6 details. It's a showstopper. They'll think twice and get up personal. It's thick armored, ranged, brawls, high damage. Okay, so these are the details. I get some other special stuff. The final cost. Oh, legal documents. Legal documents. Well, I can go read the legal documents, and those are the details, but nothing here indicating they're going to change pref tanks. Okay. Interesting. We'll talk about that later. We'll talk about that one later. Let's go back. Last thing we'll talk about on the specials is, once again, Wargaming and their wording. This is fantastic. This is a little special where they give you 7 days of premium and some silver and gold. 700,000 credits, 700 gold, and 7 days of premium. So you want to check out their game. Here's some premium. Go to it. Lots of credits to buy some of those early tanks. Fantastic. Good. How much is just enough? I don't know. How much is just enough? Need an edge on the battlefield. Well, wait a minute. How can you not get lucky? What? What edge am I buying on the battlefield? Now I'm buying an edge in crew experience and tank experience. I'm buying an edge in that I can buy a tank without grinding too much because I have 700,000. And maybe I can do a little bit of crew changes or buy a bit of a gold. I don't know, but what is the edge wargaming? Come on. This is the kind of wording that's driving people crazy with you guys. It's also where you get some of your conspiracy theories about buying premium and getting a edge in matchmaking or rigging or whatever. I mean, come on. They just never learned. It doesn't need to say that. An edge on the battlefield. It's not. Awesome. All right, let's move on. Missions and events. It's Memorial Day weekend. We were promised a great, cool thing on Memorial Day weekend. Let's see what we got. We're over on the events. Do we have a Memorial Day event? Nope. We've got Italian Tech Tree release, which is still available. You can finish that up by the 31st. So if you're still working on that, you have some time. That's highly worth doing. Highly worth doing. I highly recommend. I need more coffee. Highly recommend doing that one. You've got the BDR G1B, half of a tree, a half tree. Again, some decent rewards in there. So if you haven't gone up that line, go for it. Or even if you have, you can go for it. You just got to play the right tanks. Batchat 25T on track. All right, so nothing there. Nothing Memorial Day, massive weekend there. We'll go over here. Let's see. We're on missions. We've got Ace Masteries. Those are standard. Okay, fantastic. We can get our little cool mastery thing on there. What else we got? We come down here. Oh, Memorial Day. Here it is. Memorial Day. Memorial Day. We got you get 10 wins and you get some flags. And then you get 10 wins and some flags. All right, to be fair, to give credit where it is due, this is a crazy good deal right here, actually, for grinding. Now, as far as a big event, I don't know if I'd classify it as a great, cool Memorial Day event, because it's not really, but this is ×3 for being the top 10 in experience, whether you win or lose. Now, if you're grinding something this weekend, and I think Meat had a video out and he said you're going to want to stay in, you know, and call in sick and play all weekend. If you're grinding stuff, experience-wise, this is a fantastic deal. You know what's funny about it, though? That I had to laugh because it's so odd how they mech things a lot of times. This does not count on your first win where you get your standard ×2. I was thinking, wow, okay, so the first one's ×2, and then you get this one on top. Is it gonna stack or help? No, you don't get this until the second and subsequent wins after that. Is that a huge big deal? No. Is it weird? I don't know, a little bit. Why not just make it a ×3 weekend? Well, I suppose the way they make it is ×3 for everything, but they've had these requirements in the past. You have to do X, Y, or Z, win, blah, blah, blah. So would I classify this as a huge Memorial Day weekend event? Not necessarily, but this is, credit where it's due, that piece of it is a really good deal for you guys who are grinding experience on tanks. Not really a great deal for people who aren't necessarily looking to grind experience on tanks, unless you're looking to add free experience along the way, that kind of thing. The other thing about it is, and there's a lot of reports about this has happened to me at least twice on this weekend, there seem to be random missions or prizes. I don't know how you would classify it. I got a booster of some kind. I want to say it was it might have been a credit booster or maybe a crew booster. I came out of a game and I had that little thing pop-up that came up and it said, hey, congratulations for that mission, you got this booster. And I started digging around down here on the thing that gives you the notifications, and I looked at it and I went, okay. I don't see what mission it was. I looked on the tab that shows how you did on the mission. No information. I had actually tripped this one, and I got my flags on the same mission, but there was nothing else telling me why I got well, these are crew, so it must have been credit boosters now that I remember it. Why I got a couple extra credit boosters, I have absolutely no idea. And I don't think it was from one of the other events because I wasn't playing a tank that would have necessarily done any of those. So watch out for that. And if you got any random stuff, people said they got fire extinguishers, kits, repair kits, boosters, things like that. If you saw any of that, let us know. And if you have a theory for why it was happening, I'd also be curious because that was interesting. So it's cool. Throw cool stuff at us, but when it's just kind of random like that and you're saying there's secret missions, but you don't tell us what the fulfillment of that mission was, so we can kind of go, oh, cool, I got that for killing 3 whatevers or getting X experience or driving 50 kilometers or whatever your requirement was for getting it, then it's just random stuff thrown out and everyone's kind of like, nah, whatever. It's not good advertising and marketing, I guess. It's wargaming, man. They kill me. Every time they kill me. All right, let's move on. Let's have another coffee here. Credit to the Armored Patrol for this little gem right here telling us that the requirement for the 277, which will be the follow-on to the T10, is 220,000 experience. So if you're grinding the T10 to build up the experience to immediately unlock the 277, that's what you need. And I'm going to have to actually go back to the 430 because I had it swapped. I assumed that the heavy was going to be more expensive experience-wise than the medium, but it turns out the medium is at 252, and I'm probably almost 50 short, maybe 30 short on the 432. I believe I've got this one covered by over 30. The conspiracist in me wants to say they did that crap on purpose, but that's probably not true. Anyway, I got way too much for the heavy, and I have quite a bit too little for the medium, so I'm going to have to get back to that grind as well. But there it is. As of right now, this is off of the Armored Patrol, so props to them. Thanks a lot for that. And we'll move on to the next thing, which is going to be, the province map. Let's talk province map. Province map, province map, province map. Who's played province map? The new one. How's that going? Any different, really? We're going to talk about it a little while later because Slava actually mentions it in his Q&A. Holy cow, did they fail on that map. It is the same map. I found this little gem. One of the fun things about doing this Coffee Talk is doing the research and looking around at some of this stuff, which may seem like a waste of time to most of you, but maybe it is. I don't know. But I found this little gem in February of this year. And this first, immediately I read this first paragraph and I just started crying laughing. Remember how the province map with its layout and spawning points made camping an efficient tactic for the map? I do remember, yes, I do. We addressed these systematic issues ahead of the Italian tech tree release, ! The map got significantly redesigned to ramp up the gameplay pace while also increasing the map size. As it returns for tier 4 to 10 vehicles, we invite you to rediscover this battlefield. Well, dude, thanks for the invitation, but I am washing my hair. Okay, I can't make it. So, they increased the size, did nothing. Not big enough. They split the pathway on the east flank, new cover spots, which did nothing. The map incentivizes camping. People are either going to go down to where the two places that come up to the top, which is what they always did, and camp there until somebody shows up and tries to come up the ridge, or they're going to cross and get shot at or shoot towards the other side's ramp, with an entire swath of the middle of the map being completely and utterly useless and irrelevant. It's a camper's paradise. It was then, it is now, the size doesn't matter, and it does not work for high tier tanks. It barely works for low tier. You still have the same problems. They limited it to tier 3 or something, which at least at some of the ranges you didn't auto kill everything because a lot of times you lost so much pen at those ranges with some of the rounds. But it's the same map, fellas. You didn't do anything. You did nothing. You made it, maybe made it worse or the same. It doesn't really matter, I guess, whether that map was the worse or the same, is worse or the same because of what it was. The same is bad enough. Worse is, who cares? It's now it's the extra worst map you've ever put out. Extra worst. I just thought that was humorous when I found that article about it when I was researching, and they tell us how they're going to fix the problem, and clearly they did not fix the problem. Province is an absolute disaster. I tried to give it the benefit of the doubt, but after playing it probably a dozen, maybe 20 times since it's come out, it's clear that it's just trash, as bad as it ever was, maybe slightly worse. All right, let's move on to the 268 V4 situation. Another quick blurb on that one. Wargaming What Hath Thou Wrought with the 268 V4. The ultimate, at this point, example of power creep and releasing OP tanks to entice people to grind up to them, potentially spend money, but spend a lot of time in your game getting a tank. The only conclusion we can come to at this point is that this tank was released in its current state to do exactly that. It's not logical or reasonable to assume it was just pure buffoonery, because the company has done this too long. Not this particular thing, I mean this as in developed their game, released tanks, and managed what is ultimately one of the greatest MMOs at this point. I mean, it's been in the top 10 for 6 years. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment, because I have gone pretty negative, but we'll talk about some positive things about this game. The point here being that they've managed it up to this point. They have made their mistakes, clearly. This kind of thing has been a trend in the past, but this tank absolutely seals it as far as I'm concerned. This was done on purpose. 100% done on purpose. So what's going on? Well, they got called out, and I think that they made it a little bit too strong. I believe if it was a little bit less strong, we might not even hear about any nerfs, but there was such an outcry by the community, and the outcry was backed up by actual numbers and situations in competitive tanking. So what's interesting about most OP tanks is that they can be overcome, and they get the OP nature of them gets lost a little bit in the noise, because there's probably a couple others that are also close to it, near peers. Some of them are prize tanks that not a lot of people have, so there's a lot of noise built up around them, and it's hard to kind of pull out those numbers, and some of those numbers just plain get ignored because they don't really rise too far above the noise level. So some of those tanks have survived, and maybe there's a nerf here and there, but not many, especially not lately. This one, though, stats-wise, and how it has, what its effect on the meta is, especially the competitive meta, is it's so obvious that they've had to do something, and they're going to do a nerf. We've talked about it for the last 2 weeks, the nerf that's going to happen. And I have mentioned several times that, wow, that doesn't seem enough. And there was one iteration, then they backed it off again to another iteration, and I've seen another bunch of numbers. I'm not going to go over those right now. The gist, though, is this is basically how Guido sees this nerf going down. What is going to happen is they are going to nerf this tank around the edges. They're going to say, nerfed, we did it, and move on. And they're going to leave the mobility and the armor, which are the two problems with this tank, largely intact. And it is still going to be the fastest, or one of the fastest, heavily armored TDs, if not the fastest heavily armored TD in the game. It's going to have its armor, and it's going to have its mobility slightly nerfed, which it is going to affect its stats a little bit, but it will remain largely the same tank in the same role, and you will still see it raging around the battlefield up near the front with the mediums, and being basically unbeatable if it's got some kind of support with it and it's not completely overextended. That's what's going to happen, I promise you. And unless we see a bigger nerf coming in, and then what's going to happen if the hue and cry is still going on, the numbers will decrease slightly. Some fewer people will do well in it, and then they'll just say, well, the numbers show that it's decreased in its capability. And that's where we'll be, and that the 268 V4 will sit around as a ridiculous, overpowered, mobile, medium TD, whatever the heck this thing is supposed to be. That's my 2 cents on that. Let's go on to two things. interesting things. We're going to talk about the Pref Rebalance and the Slava Interview, and I'm actually going to do the Slava Interview first because it touches a little bit on the Pref Rebalance, but we'll leave that fun little steaming pile of stuff last. Man, I almost forgot to talk about the Ruinberg Changes. This is an interesting one. I know I've talked about this in the past, and I've got Wargaming's video up right here. This area right here where from the north side you can tuck into, I don't remember if it's the north or south side, it doesn't matter, from the right on this map, on this particular picture anyway, there's a little alcove you can tuck in there, and you could swing back up here and shoot up into the guys up in the top little village, and you could shoot down as their guys tried to cross right here. So I believe it's the south spawn had a huge advantage by taking this part of the town. They initially tried to fix it. They built an alcove over here, which was largely inaccessible to the north spawn because it was very exposed. The spawn, I'm going to keep calling it the south, I bet I'm wrong. Hope I'm not. But anyway, let's call it the right spawn. The right spawn guys would come in here and could dig them out or just shoot at them from this alcove. And so it was largely useless. Plus there was a big window over there which all the campers in the back could blast high penetration TD rounds into as well. So that did nothing to solve the problem. Well, it never was the problem, actually. The problem is this road comes up and jinks up towards this way, which gives the guys back here a shot straight down, but the other guys here, they can't actually take shots down into there. Plus, they would get stopped from the other team holding this corner right here. So what have they done? They've gone ahead, and I'll show you this as it goes along. Boom. So they've cut this corner a little bit, but what I can see, or what it seems like, is that alcove is still there, which means they're still going to be able to drive across and tuck in. And look at that, they removed all these buildings here. Now, there was not a mirror image or any buildings on the other side like there was on this side. That was a bit helpful for them because of this disadvantage on this juke right here for the road. So now they're gone. And what we created is, we'll go along here a little bit more, what we created is another sniper nest in the back. See how those buildings are there? And then watch them, boom. And now we've got another camping sniper nest in the back. Watch this. Oh, geez. All that's gone. Another view of it as it goes away. And now we've put bushes in here, much like that sideway over there has bushes for TDs to sit in the back. This shows it well as well. Boom, look, it just denuded this whole thing. And I got some video crap coming up there. Go away, I don't want you. And that's that. So that's the beginning of it. You can look at that video. It's on Wargaming's website. There's the cutoff that they did. Man, I don't know. Once again, they've cut everything back. They've made big killing zones here. Snipers sitting in the back on this side. South side, I had it backwards, didn't I? So reverse all my north-south from earlier on. The south side now has a bunch of sniper nests back down here. The north side has their sniper nest, and I don't see how that cutoff is going to change much. We'll see. I just don't see it. There's the alcove right there still, or maybe it's this one actually, right here, still exists. The cutoff here, ostensibly, is for the tanks up here to have shots down into the center circle, which was the problem with the south spawn, is they didn't really have a good shot, and it's this road that does this jink right here. They don't really have a good shot from up here down into the center. Well, they still don't really. It is cut off, but they can maybe get them on this corner, but they don't really have any shots on this corner still. Whereas from here, they have shots on both corners, just based on the angle, right? It's just geometry based on the angle, and that's going to make this spot stronger still than the southern spot. The other interesting part is, I don't know if you've ever had this happen to you, but scouts that come raging down here and hit this ridge and spot you because your spawn's over here, as you're trying to run across here, they get shots, especially a high tier where they got accurate guns. They get shots and hit you in the side. Well, these buildings sort of helped you not have that happen, but it still happened on occasion, especially crossing the road right here. Now there's nothing. Now there's nothing there, man. Good luck in your big slow tank trying to get across here without getting shot in the side by scouts and mediums, and potentially with a fast enough reload and already blapped before you can even get into the cover of the city. So unless they change the spawn point, that's going to be an interesting side effect of that. Notice that from the south spawn, where they all spawn kind of in this area, even if you run up here in your scout, it's much harder to get shots on them because they can cover up much faster. than you can from the south spawn, just based on where the spawns are. If they move the spawn over this way a little bit, actually I believe, I'm sorry, I'm talking encounter, that's encounter. You're actually more around the cap point on the regular. So on encounter, those buildings will be gone. Got that a little backwards there. But anyway, that's the Ruinberg changes. We'll see what happens. It certainly needed something because the stuff they didn't do anything. The battle up here by the church is a little more dynamic and interesting. I actually sort of like the changes that they did up there. I'm still trying to figure out how the best way to go about it. But that has definitely changed the fight. It's changed the details of the fight in the center, but not necessarily the fact that the heavies go in there and slug it out. All right, let's move on. This is the Slava Interview. This is off who is this? The Armored Patrol. Slava Makarov, and we'll go through some of these things. First question, a few words about the KV-5. Tests are just beginning, so the changes aren't final. This is my favorite part. So we hope that it will have a warm reception. We're going to talk about that later. Tanks with limited matchmaker have a very negative influence on the current balance. What? As I always say, this is a translation. There's another version of this on Rita's website, on her blog, and it's a little more matter of fact. I think this guy was attempting to get some of the context and whatnot of his speech, so take it with a grain of salt, but they are claiming it has a negative matchmaker effect. I don't know if they are claiming balance or not necessarily. That could be a translation thing. What next with the KV-2? Here's my favorite part about this. We're analyzing the data from this experiment. What data? The money? I mean, there's literally no data, dude. The only data is how many of these you sold. You didn't buff it. You didn't send out a new KV-2. It's just a KV-2 that makes more credits. So the only data there is how much money you made and if it makes too much credits and experience, which it's a premium like any other, so I'm not sure how it would make more or less than they do, other than it's an HE derp gun, which in theory should make your experience or your credits quite a bit because those are cheap shells if you don't shoot gold. So it gets better. Let's see, where is it? They wanted something that will be unique, so it will have to cost a bit. No truer words have ever been said by a wargaming employee. It's going to cost a bit. All right, what about premium tanks? People look at stats more than ever. I don't really understand what that means, whether it's us or them or everyone. For example, the Type 59 was released and people noticed how OP it was. They bought it in mass. Yes, my pretties, you will buy them in mass. By the way, I can tell you you can expect something nice in the tech tree. I'm not really sure whether that was talking about the Pref premiums or premiums in general. Talking about patch 1.0, he says visually the new patch is excellent. Hey man, you guys, I got it. That's the lead. At least from a messaging and packaging standpoint, they do have that as a common theme when they talk about 1.0. But yeah, noted. That's fantastic, as I've said before in the past. But we got other issues now, fella. Wow. So last week we talked about what's his face? Can't remember his name. Murazor. He threw Slava under the bus. So Slava is working on other people. He's got more bus driving. He's got another bus coming by. Here comes Slava's bus. Initially, I was against any changes to the arenas, but people urged me to try. Those rats, they were wrong and I was right. Yeah. Corporate messaging. Guys, get it together, man. Another one bites the bus or another one gets ridden over by the bus. I don't know. New wave of changes. He's talking about Ruinberg's a big sore spot for me. We experimented with the timing and it seems we found a solution. Well, that seems to me, that's why I mentioned in the section before that maybe there's some changes to the spawning. That's the only kind of timing changes I think that you could do, unless that's just a bad translation for something. It also made the map even more unbalanced, which I think that's just a bad translation. I think what they're trying to say is they messed around with it and they made it more balanced. But anyway, we have to wait for a new version. We have a system to monitor times and win rates for each base, which helps us fix a lot of issues. I'm trying to think of any maps that you fix the issues on with your system to monitor times and win rates. It's not coming to me, guy. I don't know if that's working. Province, we talked about. I agree with people who don't want it on high tiers. How, I'm going to click on the continue reading thing. How could you have not known that's what was going to happen with that map? That's the question that the company needs to ask. What was our internal process that allowed us to bring a map out that was basically as bad as it was before? How did we not see what was patently obvious, really, if you just looked at the map? That it was going to be a camp fest with a few people coming up and trying to light and then getting wrecked from each ramp. And never mind the fact you can get it over there. Now you have to crawl up onto a hill and attempt to push into a bunch of guys camping down a long alleyway, all hiding behind buildings and side scraping and all that, where there's very little capability in some spots for anyone all the way across to help out. That's the question that they need to add. Some people complain about lower tiers. I'm not really sure what the issue is with the lower tiers. There are issues, it's not a secret. Is that a tank design issue? Or is it more of a too many seal clubbers at low tier, or is it just the difficulty of learning the game at low tier? That's not well defined. A lot of people will say we have issues with low tiers, but then it's a big shotgun effect across about what everyone thinks the issues are at low tiers. I don't play anything lower than about 5, and rarely ever even 5, mostly 6 and above. So I'll be quite honest. You put it down in the comments down below. I don't know what those issues might be that they're talking about. So put your ideas of what they are. If you've seen them because you're a newer player and you're still down there, let me know what they are. Talk about Frontline. They've got optimization problems. They're working on that. Battle Royale is another one that they kind of worked on the side. I don't know much about that. They said they're still working on that. Is Artie still toxic? I don't think so. He doesn't think so. I don't think so, or it isn't, or I don't know. I guess that's an honest answer. Is Artie still toxic? He says, I don't think so. Okay. But we're keeping tabs. Wait a minute. So the door is still open? That would indicate some people still think it's toxic. I don't know. Is HE still problematic? It's not a problem for us anymore. Okay. Well, it's a problem for us. I think what we're really talking about here is the big guns on the Japanese heavies. But hey, it's not a problem for us anymore. We've decided that we don't want to deal with it. People still asking about all chat. That train's left the station. I wouldn't even worry about that anymore. Interestingly, he said over a third of the people in support needed to engage in issues with insults and such. So we were able to let go of 1/3 of our people once we got rid of all chat. That's a business decision to some extent. Crew changes. Oh, man, I've talked about this a couple times in the past, and I really hope this doesn't happen. Unfortunately, I think they're hell-bent on doing it. I like the crew system. I like the individuals having individual skills. What needs to be redone are the skills and perks, not the crew system. And it makes me worried when they talk about the crew system. This also worries me. Because we're about to talk about another big surprise. Right now, I can only tell it's all a big surprise and part of our WOT 2.0 list. Just as a side note, 2.0 does not mean as in a new game 2.0. It's just their internal numbering system, which they've explained in the past, which is a list of the big things they want to work on in the near future, not like a 2.0 brand new game kind of idea. Wheeled vehicles, no comments. That's interesting. So those might show up pretty soon. We've seen them before. There was a special mode, like a World War I mode, whatever that was, that had them. Talking about the EU tree, they're trying to maybe do a combo, bunch of different tanks. That would be interesting. It'd be different nationalities. How they would do the crew on that, I don't know. If they do a new crew system, maybe that new crew system fits that kind of idea better. More like ships where it's a whole crew that you build perks and stats for, so who knows. Old game modes, you had a good point right here. They'd have to start from scratch in a lot of cases because of the new HD engine. ST1 with the 2 guns, they're still trying to figure that one out. Specialization. The KB2 is not a skin, but a remodel. As you might have noticed, the technology is still in the prototype phases. Well, that's interesting because I don't know if the hit model has changed. I've heard a little bit about that, but I haven't dug into it too much. Seems like you could just put a skin on it and it wouldn't matter, really. But if they're trying to change the hit model, when I look at it, I think, all right, so what is the big light on the front damageable? Is there something poking out that's damageable because they've added some things to the side of it? I'm not really certain what exactly that means from a game mechanics standpoint, if anything. If we don't like the KB5, can we expect exclusive trade options? We'll get to that one. Maybe it's time to finally touch the Czech tree. We used what we could, but the Italians have a few TD candidates, so basically no, they're not going to do much with the Czech. And they're still pushing the whole bonds thing. I've come out against that multiple times. Again, I'm trying to understand the end game for them on what the big push with bonds is. They want to see a lot of things exchanged for bonds. This one worries me, like Hesh ammo. Well, oh, come on, man, let's not go back there. You just got rid of premium rounds for gold. Let's not go to bonds for pay to win. Which, of course, is not necessarily pay to win, but if you pay, you get more bonds faster. Just simply on getting better equipment and being able to play better. But anyway, crazy stuff. All right, so that brings us to the last thing, and this is going to be the fun part. We're going to talk about the Pref rebalance. Before we really dive into that, though, we're going to do a little Kumbaya moment here, because this is still a great game. Has been for a long time. I mentioned it earlier. It's been in the top 10 for I don't know how long, 6 years, 8, 7 years, whatever it is. There's still a lot to like about it. I make these silly videos every week. I put one out daily. I try to help people play the game. I enjoy the game. I watch it, pay attention to it, all that good stuff. I don't do that because it's a terrible game and I hate its guts. I don't even necessarily hate Wargaming's guts, although some of the things they do I hate. So there's a difference between the personal, I hate you personally, your guts, and the I don't like what you're doing. I think adults can have those kind of arguments or those kind of discussions, not even necessarily arguments. So why is it a great game? I think that's important as we look at all these changes and things going on. That they also need to look at what is the core greatness of this game, and it's the hardcore PvP nature of it. That it's PvP for one thing, it's online, you're playing against actual humans, you get to try to outsmart them. If you make mistakes, they get punished immediately, and there's not a lot of recoup mechanism for those mistakes. So that a relatively short game of about 15 minutes at the most, typically 7 or 8, if you do well, it has a whole lot to do with what you did. If you do poorly, it has a whole lot to do with what you did. There's a little team aspect. We can get into the how much you matter or not in a match and the conspiracy stuff, but really the reality is if you play well, you will have better results in general. I think we can all agree to that. And so that's what makes it such a great game. That kind of core gameplay that says, I'm going to click battle, I'm going to go in, I'm going to play with 30 other humans, we're going to have a cool tank game, shooting each other, my decisions matter, my mistakes matter, the things I do well matter, and when I come out of it, if I win, I actually feel pretty good because it was a challenge. It actually was a challenge, provided I'm not driving this thing I'm looking at right now. So that's the core goodness of the games. All the other stuff around the edges that Wargaming does, unfortunately, does on occasion take away from that aspect, but that's the management of the game. And unless they do things that very directly impact the meta or the game, I'm looking at you, 268v4, it doesn't reduce too much of the fun and the goodness from the game, but as it stacks up, it gets more and more irritating, which now brings me to, we're going to talk about the preferential matchmaking tanks and the changes that are going on right there. But before I got into all that, I just wanted to, lay out the case that it's still a great game, not to shill and not to say everything's fine and dandy, because it isn't, but just to be real and admit the core of the game is still pretty awesome. That being said, let's talk about the preferential matchmaking, because that's fun. All right, before we get to the article itself, we're going to talk about Pref Matchmaking. Why? Because it's something I've talked about and thought about for a long time. We're going to discuss a little bit about what preferential matchmaking does for the game, because it's a huge advantage, especially for good players. Why? Because you only see +1 tier, and if you're a good player, you attempt to, how do I put this? You attempt to control as much of the randomness in the game as you can. So a lot of the things you do on positioning, how you maneuver the tank, your exposure to shots, is all in an effort to minimize RNG and the many random aspects of this game. You're controlling the threat, you're controlling the risk as much as possible. One of the biggest things that's hard to control is where you get placed in matchmaking, unless you're rolling with a Pref Matchmaking tank, in which case you know you will always be only 1 down. And then, even though that tank is in theory weaker, air quotes, carrying a little bit of gold mitigates most of that, and a slightly weaker tank that can control for never seeing 2 tiers above is still a stronger tank than a regular tech tree tank. That's just the way it is, especially based on the stats that the tanks have. As an example of all of this, you're looking at my record right here via tanks, and if you looked at all my Pref tanks, you would find that they're anywhere from 2 to 5 to 7% higher than comparable tier tanks, because they're Pref, and I'm a decent player, so I can control better for the randomness of Matchmaker by making sure I never am 2 down, unless I'm stupid and I platoon. IS-6, 65%. Type 59, 60%. Coming down to 112, 61%. Super Persian, 62%. FCM, 61%. If you look at my Panther, M10, 60%. If you compared the like tanks, most of my tech tree tanks are going to be anywhere from 5 to 2% lower than those as a general rule, given that roughly the same amount of battles. And those are all my high count tanks. T-34-3 at 58. That one's a little bit lower. WZ-111, 62%. I think you get the picture going in there. So, preferential tanks, to be quite honest to everybody, not to burst anyone's bubble, have actually been an issue for wargaming. And I've always wondered why they didn't really discuss it too much. I'm going to go out on a limb, and they were basically overpowered because of preferential matchmaking. That's just simply the fact. They were. Tier for tier, yes, they were slightly worse as far as the stats go. But this goes back to things I've been saying before. The stats are all well and good, but there is a system built around the matchmaker system that matters. And the matchmaker system allowed you to only be 1 down. And even though you were a slightly less capable tank overall, the fact that you never saw 2 above removed a lot of the randomness from Matchmaker for that tank, and over time made that tank have better results in general than other tech tree tanks of the same tier. That's just the fact. That's basically how it works. So now we get to the article and preferential matchmaking tanks being changed, because when we start to look at the article, I'm going to start to question what the actual reason is for this change, because I've always looked at them as this is an interesting situation. The selling point was that you were only 1 down, and for any quality of player, that's going to be a selling point. Why? Because it removes some of the randomness from your matchmaker. I know I'm only going to be 1 down, so that was a selling point, but it was also a problem from the game meta standpoint, because it really did make the tank slightly overpowered. But that's not really what they're keying in on. So we'll get to the article and we'll talk about that. All right, here's the article, Perfecting Preferential Premiums. This has caused a giant crud storm all over the place for multiple reasons. There's even a community contributor who quit the community contributor program, Aging Jedi Mark GFL or GFL Mark, something like that. Good YouTuber, got good content. Check it out. I would suggest that if you're interested in looking at different voices. But anyway, there's a lot of reaction videos out there, people talking about it. And I mentioned in the section before that one of the big problems with preferentials is that it minimizes the RNG as far as matchmaker goes, and it's a huge advantage for good players. Obviously, that did not run rampant across the entire meta, but before 3.5.7 and power creep, mostly power creep, a little bit 3.5.7, you could find a platoon of preferentials, and if you got top tier, you could absolutely run roughshod. You might say you could do that with any tank, but it was much more common before 3.5.7 to find those games. After 3.5.7, it's very, very difficult for a tier 8 to get a top, especially in a platoon, any kind of top tiering, without it necessarily being, you know, full of other 8s, you know, just a pure 8 kind of thing. So there's clearly some kind of issue with that, but we look at wargaming, and heading into the summer, we keep addressing our huge to-do list, bumping up the most important topics to the top. Next in line is preferential prems issue. But the issue is not defined really until now, and what they define it as is it's ruining matchmaking, which is questionable at best. A little over a year ago, World of Tanks upgraded to version 9.1.8, introducing important enhancements to matchmaking, in case the 3.5.7. As opposed to its predecessor, the new version's functionality was based on several templates that regulated pre-battle team information. Since then, the tool has gone through several changes until it's reached a level of performance that met the expectations of both the community and the dev team. Okay? False. It hasn't met the expectations. Let's have another history lesson, because I talked a little bit about preferential. Let's talk about matchmaking. Here's the ugly truth about the change in the matchmaking, and people whined about matchmaking. They still do, but before 3.5.7, it was really chaotic, because nobody could really define what the problem with matchmaking was. And wargaming ended up defining it as, we need a 3.5.7 stack pyramid system. Every problem I had, nearly every problem I had with the old matchmaking system, which frankly was actually pretty good. It just was. You can disagree with me, but it was actually not bad. The problems were the mismatches, where you could literally have 10 tier 10s against 5, because they had this weighting system, weight of vehicles. And sometimes all those extra 9s added up to more weight than the 10 tier 10s, but it just didn't turn out to be a great system. You could have a stack of 5 heavies on one side and 5 mediums on the other side. There was no way to rack and stack heavies and mediums. It didn't look at it. It was a pure weight system. A couple lower heavies would be fine, and it would be a mess. The imbalances then were created on class and tier mismatches, not the fact that you didn't have 3.5.7, but the fact that you had 10 tops on one and 5 on the other. Well, a quick sort after you built that team to look at it and go, hey, let's move a couple heavies to the other side and a couple mediums to there, would have worked just fine. Or something that stopped that from happening to begin with. But the 3.5.7 does not meet the expectations of the community, even though it may meet the expectations of the dev team. Because the old matchmaker system was actually not that bad and needed tweaking, not being shit canned and thrown out baby and bathwater, which is the MO of this company whenever they come in with a mallet where they could have used a scalpel. When you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So now that the game has proper team distribution, wow, mismatches are a rare case. Everyone's happy, right? Not really. Okay, fair enough. Not really. And then we get into fantasy world. The new approach benefited everyone apart from preferential premium vehicles. Okay, fair enough. Preferential premium owners are getting the shaft from 3.5.7, right? No. It turns out that preferential vehicles are shafting our fantastically awesome 3.5.7, and if we just change preferential vehicles, by golly, then we can get back up here to where it meets the expectations of the community and the dev team. But except they already told us that it met the expectations of the community and the dev team. except it doesn't meet the expectations because those dastardly preferential tanks are ruining it all for everyone. Okay. The coin has two sides. The first issue comes from the main feature of preferential premiums, tier range balance. Starting from mid-tiers, all vehicles have -1, +2. Well, you know what? Thanks for breaking that down, brother, but we got it. All right? Yes, your Tiger 2 can meet an IS-4 or it can meet a 12T. Noted. Preferential premiums, you won't encounter an opponent higher than tier 9. That's why they bought it. You got it though, guys. You nailed it. That is why they bought it. But unfortunately, the new matchmaker struggles with these machines. A lot of words here. They talk about matchmaker as a problem. No kind of number, no kind of context of how it struggles. It gives some kind of ridiculous thing in here. It says, here it is. This is what happens next. Try to follow this because I can't really. The matchmaker starts grabbing an excessive number of tier 9 tanks to fill up team rosters for preferential premiums. What do you mean by excessive? So they become deficient when it comes to forming teams for tier 10 machines. The matchmaker then looks for something to fill gaps for the tier 10s, and look who's there. Hello, tier 8s. Well, that's a crock of crap. It's a 357 hard-coded system. It doesn't matter if tier 8s are there or not. It's going to grab tier 8s. If what you're saying is the tier 8s that are tech tree get more top or bottom tier against 10 missions or matchmaker matches, maybe. But if you change the prefs to regular matchmaking, there's still going to be a bunch of tier 8s sitting around getting in tier 10 battles. By definition, with 357, your bottom tier X percentage, no matter whether you're preferential or not. That's not exactly true. If you're preferential, then you're bottom tier less because there's one whole group of matchmaking you don't participate in. But how that exactly impacts regular tech tree tier 8s, I'm not buying. Maybe someone down below can tell me the math. It would be nice if Wargaming had put something out there and said, look, this is what it looks like. The math is such. If you with preferential tanks currently in the matchmaker system, this is how many extra bottom tier 8 battles your Tiger 2 gets. And if we remove it in our simulations, then your bottom tier Tiger 2 gets X percentage more of middle to top tier matches. If they'd have come with those numbers and made it clear cut, I think everyone would go, I see that now. You're right. It looks like the preferential matchmaking is messing with your matchmaker. But they don't do that. A, because I don't think it's true. I can't prove that. And B, I think they're just scapegoating the preferential matchmaker tanks. Now, what happens if they do this and nothing changes? That's what I think is going to happen. They do this and it's still going to be tier 8 tanks getting the shaft on a 357. Based on a 357, not because there's a little sidebar of some preferential tanks that never see the top tier. Now we're getting into a more interesting discussion. The second issue is preferential premiums combat specs. That's only an issue, fellas, if you change them to +2, -2. Then it's obviously an issue. It's also somewhat an issue, and one of the reasons prefs haven't been quite as popular lately is power creep, because the other tanks around them, whether they be tier 9s or tier 8s themselves, have been power crept. So a IS-6, for example, can quite often see a defender. An IS-6 has a very difficult time dealing with a defender. A Chrysler, the French thing with all the armor in the front, all the different tanks with a lot of armor that have power crept and showed up. So they do have a small issue with their combat specs, even currently as preferential tanks. But the fix apparently is to make them +2, -2, C tier 10s, and super buff them so that they're now, I guess, on par with the other tier 8s. Well, here's an interesting thing. Are they going to be buffed so much that they're defender level? Are we going to take all the preferential tanks and buff them to defender level capability? Or are they going to be sub-defender level capability? You're going to take away the preferential, which is the reason why a lot of people bought them, and you're going to buff them, but you're not going to make them overpowered like the defender is? An inadequate defender level premium tank? Is that where we're going? We have plenty of those. I mean, there are tanks that are not as good at tier 8 premium as the defender, but the track record in the recent past has been to release overpowered tier 8 premiums. So that's going to be interesting to watch. So we're now fixing both these issues. This is how we want to do it. Reduce queuing time. This is something I haven't touched yet. Raise your hand if queue time has been an issue, other than maybe at weird times when you would expect it anyway because it's, you know, 3 in the morning or whatever, and maybe you waited 30 seconds. I hardly ever wait with tier 8s. I don't see it. This is not a problem. If they put numbers out and said, here's the queuing time in our simulations with Pref, here's the queuing time in our simulations without Pref, and you could show a significant change in the queuing time, then I think everybody would go, huh, that looks reasonable. But they make a claim that is dubious at best and is not a thing that anyone gives 2 rats arses about. Not even 1 rat's arse. Not even 1. Turn preferential premium tanks into well-rounded competitive machines. They already are, as preferential tanks. Slightly power crept, but you know what? Recently, they actually buffed the WZ-111 and the 112. Remember that? Made them quite a bit better. They were even worse about a year and a half. Man, that might even be 2 years ago now. But they buffed both those tanks, and I believe the IS-6 as well somewhere in there. I might be wrong on the IS-6, but I know the other 2 got buffed. How come it took so long? This gets great, guys. This gets great. It's the price you might pay for an error. Who pays for the error? Because we're about to find out. This guy. Hey, Wargaming, how come it took you so long to deal with your preferential tank situation? Well, a couple reasons. First, there's a lot of problems with it that don't actually exist, so we're going to create some problems. And it's the price you guys have to pay for preferential matchmaking problems that don't exist that we want you to believe do. Okay, there's a lot of preferential tanks in battle. Yeah, you sold a lot because they were preferential tanks. Yeah, so we'll have to process a multitude of options before settling on a happy medium. Oh, fantastic. Let's settle on a happy medium. Let's get a consensus that makes no one happy. That sounds like a great idea. Good job, fellas. Initially, we took different directions or approaches. The global direction would tweak the work of the balancer so that the preferential premiums have higher chances of getting into the top 3 of the 357 list. Ideally, this solution would be beneficial for these machines with no need for substantial edits to their specs. The reality, however, hit us in the face during several internal tests and simulations which indicated minor improvements countered by an overall decline in matchmaking. This was really interesting to me. So here's what I think. As they were looking for fixes, because it's hard to get a top tier match in your preferential tank based on 357, they looked to prioritize their preferentials so they got more high tier battles, top tier battles, but it had a detrimental effect on the matchmaking. Well, that I believe. But that, if you go up to the top, they're not indicating that in tests they had a problem. They're trying to tell us that they have a problem now. And that's really telling right there. So they abandoned that approach. Oh, interesting. I bet the numbers they're talking about it affecting Matchmaker is this BS, which was a test, trying to get your preferential tier 8 to more high tier or top tier battles. The local decision was to opt for an individual approach to every model, bringing the changes they need and thus reducing the overall negative impact made by preferential premiums on Matchmaker, which they've never proven exist, other than up here. After a series of tests, this proved to be the go-to solution, but caused another problem. Some of the current preferential prems are old in terms of combat characters. That problem existed already, fellas. That's not a new problem. It's definitely a problem if you're going to make them all plus or minus. It's not a local direction, by the way. This is BS. Approach to every model. The only local part of every model is they're going to buff them and what specific stats they buff them to. They're going to make them all +2, -2. That's not local. That's a complete change of what preferential tanks are. So you can stop blowing that smoke up our rectums at this point. Some of the current preferential prims are so old, blah, blah, blah. They require major revisions. You know, a lot of times they will come out and say, you know what, this is not just a situation of balancing where we just move a slider and make something have more pen or more armor. Guess what, fellas? This is the case of they're going to move a slider, and they're going to give tanks much more armor and pen, maybe change guns here and there, but that's basically what you're getting. You're going to get a buffed premium, tier 8 premium, that in their mind is going to take on tier 10s as well as any tier 8 does, which is not great. Now we're getting into the best part, and probably the part that is causing the biggest heartache. I've talked a lot about this so far, and there's multiple things going on here. Preferential matchmaking is definitely an advantage. They did have an issue with it. I don't think it was the issue they thought they did. They're trying to have their cake and eat it too here. And now we get to the monetization and marketing guys, and they throw their 2 cents in, and this is where it really gets ugly. Because they're looking at the legal aspects, and they want to make sure that they don't get lawsuits or that kind of thing, because they're going to offer you the ability to trade that tank in. Except that they're going to charge you some gold to do it. Basically money. So you bought a tank, they're going to change that tank. If you don't like that change, they're going to offer you a different tank, but they're going to charge you a little bit for it, a surcharge. A surcharge to get a different tank. No indication of what tanks they were or whether people would even want those tanks. They talk about some of the rare tanks. Maybe it'll be some tanks that are hard to get. Could be a good deal if there was a certain tank in there you were looking for. But remember, nobody, not nobody, most people bought it for the preferential matchmaking. That's why they bought that tank, to make credits, to make experience, to limit the amount of RNG in matchmaker for themselves. You're taking that away, offering them a new tank, but charging them 2,000 gold. Or you can keep the new upgraded tank that doesn't have the major characteristic that you bought it for. Alright, that is a lot on that. There's a lot going down. The KV5 is going to be the first one. Just some real quick numbers so far that they're talking about. They're going to buff the penetration to 218 and 243. If you remember, that 107 is very anemic. And I don't know if this is a new gun or they're just going to take that gun and slide the numbers to the right and call it good. They're going to change some armor. That's down here, getting thicker and a little bit thinner actually on the back. And then you're going to get 330 alpha instead of the much less 240 or whatever it is right now. Actually, it might be 300 actually for the 107. But just slider action really. KV5 being the pioneer. This is interesting. We're going to see how this goes. They really... I won't say they dropped it out of nowhere because they've been talking about a preferential rebalance for a long time. I've mentioned it multiple times. A lot of the Q&As they've been talking about it, but there was no details, and I always said, all right, we're waiting. Let's see what they're going to do. There really wasn't much to do. It was this or buff them slightly, or stop selling them. Which brings me to the last thing, and probably the thing that I think a lot of people are really keying in on. I think it's par for the course. They're still selling Pref tanks. Remember at the very beginning when I showed you the IS-6? Well, there's a method to my madness. You can still buy an IS-6. There's no indication there of preferential matchmaking going away, of them talking about changes. They haven't suspended sales of preferential matchmaking tanks. In fact, they have a couple specials on ones that are really sold, where you're buying it probably for preferential matchmaking, and it's going to get changed. That's really poor. I don't think it's the end all. You know, the universe is ending because of it. But it's just par for the course. As I watch this company and do my commentary, that's the kind of thing I expect and doesn't surprise me. That is one of the reasons why Aging Jedi quit. Probably the main reason that he was irritated with them. Quit the community contributor program. It just doesn't surprise me. It really does. It's too bad. I think they would make a lot of mileage if they would have just said, all right, we got this big change. By the way, we're going to suspend sales on the premium tanks or the Pref tanks because we don't feel it's right to continue to sell them. We realize you're going to be very angry about it. Here's the reasons why we're changing it. Here's some of the data instead of just BS, because that's all they ever do is give us BS and blow smoke up our asses. Right? It really is. They just make claims that are either patently false and provable so, or pie in the sky. They say it is, and so it is. Now, they don't have to give me a briefing on exactly what all the numbers are, obviously, and they can run their company the way they want. But they could cut off at the knees so much of the hue and cry about these things if they would just offer some realistic data about what it's doing. Problem is, I don't think they have it. I don't think they have it. Anyway, that's a lot. That is it for this coffee talk. I've had enough. I'm getting out of here. I'm going to drink my coffee, maybe play a World of Tanks game because I hate it so much. All right, guys. Have a good Memorial Day weekend. See you.